Welcome to the fourth episode of my Wellness Breathing Stretching channel. In this episode, I'll talk about suspension of breath in the context of the extended exhalation breathing technique. To learn more about the foundations and the performance of the extended exhalation breathing technique, please listen to episode 1 of this podcast. Why do I say that suspension of breath is good for us? The answer to this question lies in the paradoxical role of carbon dioxide in our breathing system. We obviously all know that when we breathe, we inhale air for its oxygen and exhale air in order to emit the waste material of the breathing process, namely carbon dioxide. Interestingly, however, a significant amount of carbon dioxide remains in our lungs after a normal exhalation. Since most mammals breathe the way we do, a very interesting question comes up regarding our evolution. If breathing is merely a straightforward exchange of gases, how come we do such a dirty job of exhaling? Why does so much carbon dioxide stay in our lungs? Why haven't we or any other mammal developed a more efficient way of emitting all carbon dioxide in our exhalation? One major reason for this is that we actually need carbon dioxide in our blood. Not all of it is waste material. Its presence in our body is instrumental in oxidation, that is, in the biochemical process of loading our red blood cells with oxygen and delivering the oxygen to our cells. Our body has its own signaling system to control the rate of our inhalation and exhalation. We all have a certain personal average, which is our own breathing rate. However, modern life with its sedentary lifestyle often pushes this average in the direction of faster breathing. So we want to learn to slow down. This learning involves training our body to restrain the need we feel to start the next inhalation. The two ways to tell our body to wait with the next inhalation is to intentionally lengthen our exhalation and intentionally suspend our breathing after exhalation. We can lengthen our exhalation by narrowing our throat during exhalation. In pranayama, the breathing tradition of yoga, this technique is called ujjayi breathing. I'll devote the next episode to this technique. The term for suspension of breath in pranayama is Kumbhaka. I'll use this term here instead of saying suspension of breath or holding our breath. In pranayama, Kumbhaka may be performed both after inhalation and after exhalation. Here, we're interested in Kumbhaka after exhalation. In case you chanced upon this episode without previous exposure to the extended exhalation breathing technique, here is a brief summary. In extended exhalation breathing, we take a deep inhalation through our nose, followed by a slow and long exhalation, again through our nose, and then we add an interval of Kumbhaka, Kumbhaka being suspension of breath, remember? And we repeat this sequence of inhalation, exhalation, and Kumbhaka as long as we wish. To learn more about the foundations and the performance of the extended exhalation breathing technique, please listen to episode 1 of this podcast. I'll start by discussing Kumbhaka in relaxed breathing meditation, and then I will also discuss it in the context of walking and running. So let's get into a comfortable sitting position. Take a deep, satisfying inhalation and slowly exhale. not all the way to completely empty lungs. Stay in mid-range lung capacity. When you finish exhaling, see how long you can comfortably stay in Kumbhaka. Whatever you manage to do is fine. Repeat this breathing cycle of inhalation, exhalation, and Kumbhaka a few more times. Now we're getting to an interesting milestone. Try to hold your Kumbhaka beyond your comfort zone. Say to the count of 3 or 4 and observe in yourself what's happening. One possibility is that nothing has happened. You simply couldn't trust yourself to go for this long. You didn't realize you could do it. Now you do. If so, repeat your new breathing cycle a few more times to secure your new comfort zone. You may be able to expand your comfort zone even more. At some point, you will really go beyond your comfort zone. This will be signaled to you by your body in 2 ways. One possibility is that you will panic. Panic may include increased heart rate, sweating, trembling, or feeling extreme fear that something terrible is going to happen. However, panic may be tamed by desensitization. Repeated exposure to the same panic-inducing situation makes this situation more familiar and less frightening. So here again, you may repeat your breathing cycle with a longer Kumbhaka a few more times, turning your panic to mindful apprehension. Whether or not you have gone through the panic stage, your next milestone is physiological. At some point in your now well-advanced Kumbhaka, you will feel involuntary cramps of muscles in your chest and stomach. These are your breathing muscles trying to tell your body to stop the Kumbhaka and for God's sake to take in some fresh air. At this point, listen to your body and take a deep and satisfying inhalation and start another cycle. Befriend yourself with these new sensations and stretch each Kumbhaka to that point of cramping. Does it come at the same time in each cycle? Or does your Kumbhaka get even longer? Up until now, I was comfortable with giving you instructions. But now, I will stop giving you instructions because I don't know your medical condition. From here onwards, I'll tell you what I do. And please be medically responsible. Perhaps seek medical advice before you go deeper into Kumbhaka. So, coming back to the stage of Kumbhaka where I feel movements and cramps of my breathing muscles, I now lower my chin to my chest. This lowering of the chin locks the air pipe. This is called in Sanskrit Jalandhara Bandha, which means locking the flow of water. Indeed, this bandha, namely this lock, stops the flow of vital energy, namely the stream of air that is likened to a stream of water. This throat lock physically disables breathing, thus giving me an opportunity for self-observation. I notice that nothing bad happens, and in fact I can hold my breath even a little bit longer. I said above that we need carbon dioxide in our blood in order to load our red blood cells with oxygen and deliver the oxygen to our cells. However, when our body spots an excess amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, it signals us to inhale. Practicing Kumbhaka progressively increases the tolerance of our body to handle higher levels of carbon dioxide without experiencing discomfort or negative symptoms. The work of Dr. Buteyko and his followers suggests that developing higher carbon dioxide tolerance helps people with managing asthma and other respiratory conditions, allergies, and anxiety-related breathing disorders. So much for performing Kumbhaka in a relaxed seated condition. Let's now turn to managing our exhalation plus Kumbhaka during walking and running. In episode 1, I discussed at length how to perform extended exhalation breathing during walking and running. In a nutshell, the sum total of steps per inhalation and exhalation should be an uneven number. For example, you may inhale over 2 steps and exhale over 3 or 5 steps. Or you can inhale over 3 steps and exhale over 4 or 6 steps. Some years back, when I started doing this in my runs, I started out with a 2-to-3 ratio and then increased it to a 2-to-5 ratio. I no longer run, so let me talk about vigorous walking, which is now my aerobic workout. In it, I refined my ability to extend my exhalation and perform a meaningful Kumbhaka at its end. Let me say right at the beginning, extending our exhalation in a vigorous walk is not easy. Even without Kumbhaka, it already challenges carbon dioxide levels in our blood. Moreover, when the path climbs up, it is even harder. The way to develop carbon dioxide endurance is to gradually increase the ratio between inhalation and exhalation. My usual walking path is circular, and 2 rounds of it take me 1 hour. About 1/3 of it is level, another third is uphill, and the last third is downhill. When I started taking this path, I was doing a 2-to-5 ratio, that is, inhaling over 2 steps and exhaling over 5. When I got to the climbing part of my path, I felt I ran out of air after 3 steps of exhalation, so I switched to a 2-to-3 ratio. This is what I suggested that you do in episode 1 of this podcast. However, after a while, I found out that at the end of my exhalation, I could actually hold my breath for another 2 steps. So, completing exhalation to the count of 3 plus Kumbhaka to the count of 2 kept me within the 5-step zone of exhalation in the broad sense, exhalation plus Kumbhaka. This was now the way I proceeded. As time went on, I felt comfortable enough with the 2-to-5 ratio, so I raised it to 2-to-7, reverting back to 2-to-5 ratio in the more difficult parts. Eventually, I added a Kumbhaka of 2 steps, thus raising the ratio back to 2-to-7 throughout the whole path. I'll save you all the intermediate steps. I now use a ratio of 2-to-11 in the easier parts and 2-to-9 or 2-to-7 in the more difficult parts. 11 steps is quite a long stretch, so even in the easier parts, I used Kumbhaka as part of the end of my exhalation. But can we physically force Kumbhaka the way we did in the relaxed sitting meditation? Is there a lock we can use? We certainly can. When I try to force myself to use a 2-to-9 or 2-to-11 ratio all the way through my walk, I often get out of breath at step 4 or 5 of my exhalation in the steeper parts of the path. Obviously, I can't use the traditional throat lock by lowering my chin to my chest while walking. But there is another way of locking the throat, and that's by swallowing. Under normal eating conditions, when we swallow food or liquid, a group of muscles in our throat moves it from our mouth through our throat and into the esophagus, while ensuring that the windpipe remains shut, in order to prevent food or liquid from entering it. This is equally true when we just swallow our saliva. So, the throat lock in my physical activity is swallowing my saliva. I was really surprised to find out how far I can go with a kumbhaka imposed by a throat lock during strenuous parts of my walk. To be sure, most of my kumbhakas are just an organic continuation of the exhalation done with an open windpipe. I use the throat lock only on rare occasions when I really feel I want to push my stamina a bit further. When I started experimenting with throat locks during walks, I was no longer running, so I can't personally report to you to what extent this is feasible. I would guess it is. After all, practice makes perfect. Before I finish, you might be wondering, how is it at all possible to suspend your breath for 7, 9, or even 11 steps under physical effort? Doesn't the air burst out due to the effort? The way to prevent the air from bursting out is by constricting your throat while exhaling. In yoga, this technique is called ujjayi breathing, and it will be the topic of the next episode of my podcast. So stay tuned. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode. If so, why not spread the word and share my podcast channel with friends and colleagues? I'll be very glad to hear from you about your experiences with suspension of breath, both at rest and during physical activity. You can leave a comment on my Wellness Breathing Stretching podcast channel. One way of hearing about my forthcoming episodes is to check the follow or subscribe button on your podcast application. So long, and see you again on future episodes.